Thanks, Shelley. And I think it's actually really exciting for me as well to be presenting here. So thanks for inviting me. I think when you asked me so many months ago, the book was still in that kind of state of where's it going to end up kind of mode, if that makes sense. And I've never put a book together before, so this was all new to me. We're obviously in the last couple of weeks with all the chapters coming together in their sort of final products. It's it's really segued nicely into this evening to really get excited now about the final mile and actually a book that's going to be created out of it. I have to throw a thank you out to Shelley though, so everyone is aware, because this was a kind of half-cooked idea I had at the end of last year. And I just thought, and I'll explain exactly why in the presentation, I guess, but, really half-baked idea. And I have lots of them and sometimes different people to bounce them off. And this one, I just decided to send an email, and the response to the email was overwhelming, like, yeah, absolutely. That's exactly the kind of thing we're looking to publish. So that was a really great kickstart to a project that, could have just been an idea that was thought about once and nothing else. So this presentation tonight, well, tonight for me, I apologize for everyone over in Europe, is a little bit of a story about why that came together and how, and hopefully what it will achieve in the future. I hope anyway, we'll see. So the session flow this evening, I'm just going to do a brief introduction and sort of unpack why. So why the idea came up in the first place. I'm going to share some inspirations around where that idea came from. I'm going to definitely share with you the contributors, because everyone that's contributed to this book, like the amazing presenters at this conference this evening, have done so as a bit of a labor of love. It's because they love what they do, they love where they work, and they wanted to share those stories. So I think it's definitely worth honoring them. A little bit about pulling it together. Which is, I think a fun story for me, because I'm not a book writer by any means. And so coming from a very rookie angle on how this all got pulled together, I think, is an interesting one out there for anyone that thought a book sounds too hard. It can be done. And then some reflections, because, and this is the exciting part for me, because I didn't have reflections 6 months ago, but now, at the third mile here of actually editing the chapters, it's really interesting reading from play workers all over the world who work in spaces that are very, very different often. These really common themes that flow between what they do day to day in their spaces. And I want to try to share some of those with you this evening. I'm also I've tried to, throughout this presentation, include as many images as I could from as many of the playgrounds that contributed to the book, just to give a little bit of an idea about what they could look like in different spaces. So the one on the screen now is my daily runabout, which I'll show a few more photos of a little bit later. With the questions, it's interesting because it's always a tricky one, because I'm definitely happy to wait to the end for questions. I know, Shelley, you mentioned keeping the mics muted. If there was, though, with 27 people in the room at the moment, I feel like if there was anything that seemed profoundly relevant to the slide that we're on right now, I also don't mind being interrupted. We've got 45 minutes and I've only guessed at how long this would take. It's a different sort of presentation for me. I'm usually delivering theory and concepts that I can set a bit of more of a timeline to, whereas this is sharing a story. So it's a little bit different from that perspective. So if you did want to put a hand up or just shout out, I'll give it my best. I know there's some people I know in the room. I dare say, Callum, if you can keep your mouth closed, I'll be very impressed. No, I won't be offended though. I'd love to hear from you, mate. It's been far too long. I hope Japan is going very well for you. But anyway, that's the basic run, and we'll see how we go. Oh, did I hear him?
Yes, you did.
There it is. I hope, yeah, well, mate, there is a Japanese playground in here for you this evening, so I hope you enjoy it.
Oh, very exciting. All right, go ahead.
All right, cool. All right, we better move on. Sorry. Blast from the past there. Good to see you, Callum. So, why this project? Where did this idea came from? So, long story short, it was inspired by past authors. A lot of books that I'd been reading, unpacking really amazing stories about play and play provision, right back to, pre the term play worker, you know, and there's play leaders and play wardens and all these other terms for these professionals in the field. And I love these stories so much, and they inspired me a lot. And this will come together at the end of this presentation, because it always blew me away that despite the difference in time and the difference in adversity that children might have faced, and the difference in, you know, geopolitical situations, some of the basic grassroots stuff that was happening in play, the conflicts, the perception of play by the public, all of that sort of stuff sort of transcends that time. And that really caught me. It really caught me in reading some of the old books. And it got me thinking long and hard about why and what the relevance there was. It was also an excuse for me, and I'm not going to lie at all, to connect with, ideally, the wider play work world. And that was definitely part of my email to Shelley about, do you reckon this could be done? Like, is this a good idea or not? I don't know. Down here in Australia, I work in a playwork inspired setting, and to get to one of the only recognised adventure playgrounds in Australia would take me a flight from Brisbane to Melbourne, which would effectively be like flying from London to Moscow or something similar. So a lot of ground to be covered to visit these spaces. And anyone in Australia here would know that, even though there's these amazing pockets that are bursting up everywhere of playwork and playwork inspiration. You know, it's still disconnected. It's a huge country, and doing something about that, I thought was important as well. So for me, this book was also a bit of an excuse, if you could call it that, or a motivation to connect with a lot of other practitioners from all over the place, and talk and share and connect and critically reflect and all of that good stuff that only happens by networking outside of your immediate bubble. Reflecting on our own playground and its story was also a big motivation. The playground that I work, and I'll share a slide with that soon, it's got a long history now. It's been around for nearly 14 years. And when I say long history, nowhere near the history that many other playgrounds have, but certainly in Australia, that's a decent chunk of time. And it's got a history now. It's got a story. And it's a story that we do get asked about a lot, and we get asked to share behind podiums and in services and in community centres and so on and so forth. So I thought really recording that story and allowing it to be available to people in text could be important when we were no longer able to also share that for people to be inspired. Wanting to compare that story to other stories and journeys and see what the similarities were. Once again, that critical reflection, what's the same, what's not, why, does it matter, does it not? It doesn't matter, but it's just, you know, getting that story out there and seeing what other people were doing, and really wanting to create something that could inspire others wherever they may be. So for Australia, we know that our playground has inspired others because it's contextual. It's the same legislation, it's the same authorization, the Ed Department, and so on and so forth. So we can use Camp Hill as a bit of a beacon, but that's just our story. I really wanted to bring together a group of stories that anyone in the world could read, and no matter where they were, could find something in there, something from their perspective, from their particular culture, whether that's, you know, ethnic culture or their geographical culture or their community culture, something would be relevant for them and they'd be able to draw from that. Because we've all read those stories, that they're amazing and they inspire us, but we know it won't work in our setting. So bringing a bunch of stories together, though, where there would be something for everyone was something I was really passionate about as well. That photo there is one of my favorites from The Yard in New York City. Yoni Kallai is the author for that chapter, and anyone that hasn't seen The Yard before, I highly encourage you to look it up. It's got some phenomenal grounds, and you can appreciate kids living in New York. That space is something quite amazing, to be honest with you. Inspiration. So we spoke about that earlier, and these were the sorts of books that I was talking about. These were the sorts of books that when I was getting into my playwork research in the early days, once again in Australia, the ability to do any sort of degree or even certificate in an actual university setting doesn't exist. So thank God for places like PARS and so on and so forth, where we can do it from abroad, because there's nothing recognised in the country that would allow you to be a qualified person working in a space. So we've got to reach out. And these older books always appealed to me. Jack Lambert's Adventure Playgrounds, Jack Lambert and Jenny Pearson, that's a phenomenal one. Lady Ellen of Hurtwood, obviously one of my greatest idols in the world anyway. So that's always been a great book to read. And the two there that I actually bought from Common Threads, Adventure in Play and Adventure Playgrounds, amazing stories. And these were the books that really got me thinking about contemporary playgrounds, though, because a lot of the stories, and I'm not an academic in this sense, and Shelley, you'll probably give me a lot of examples of where I'm wrong in saying this, but a lot of these stories exist of adventure playgrounds, and then they're dated. And there seems to be an academic pickup of playwork, and a lot of the contemporary publications in playwork are very, very steeped in the academic realm. Obviously, there's blogs and stuff out there that are exceptions to that, but from a published book perspective, that was what I was getting in my research. And that's where the initial idea really came from was, well, hang on. And by the way, I'm not criticizing academic writing. I actually very much enjoy it. However, we all know that there needs to be something else. And these books here inspired me to really want to reach out and create a book like this, but with contemporary playgrounds that exist now, that are open now, and only have been around for the last maybe decade. So they've had to teed and grow and experiment in the current climate, you know, against the odds, so to speak. And lots of different things, the increased risk aversion, COVID, all these things play into why that's different and why it has to be different. So as amazing as the stories are in these books are, and how inspiring they are, we wanted a freshener, if that makes sense. Pictures like these, you know, I grew up the last decade just adoring these, but they're lovely to look at. But let's get some new ones. Let's get a book of new ones, I guess is where I'm going. So this is the playground I work at a school called Camp Hill. We have 300 children in this space every single day, morning and afternoon, so collectively about 6 hours. To accommodate 300 children, this space needs to be something pretty amazing and have a pretty amazing team to also support that space. So that's been my life for the last nearly 14 years, actually, but nearly 10 years looking like that anyway. This space is amazing, and it changes and it grows and it gets pulled down and it gets rebuilt on a regular basis. And we stumbled across, you know, the desire to do this quite intuitively. Before I knew what the word playwork was, we started going sort of down this road, and it was actually only a freak coincidence. And I do talk about this in the Camp Hill chapter, that some of my staff were on holiday and bumped into a playground in Berlin, Cola 37. And they were like, oh, hello, what's this? It's a legitimized version of what we wanted to do anyway. And the word playwork was discovered, and we brought that back and started learning everything we could in this area. So this playground's now been like this for 10 years. It's grown a huge community around it. The parents now choose the school for this, which is one of our greatest laurels in getting that word out there, because schools like that. They like to be popular. They don't want to have the point of difference that people are a bit worried about. They want the point of difference that's going to bring people in, if that makes sense, and develop stronger communities as a result. So this was the story that I wanted to tell, but obviously we needed more than one story to make this book work. So what next? The call went out. So long story short, because of that drive to learn about playwork, I've been networking for a long time with a lot of amazing playworkers around the world. For example, the playground on the screen there, Jill Wood is the head playworker there at Adventure Play at the Parish School. One of the most amazing playgrounds you'll ever see, because it's also attached to an additional needs school, and seeing the children play in that space is just something else. It's amazing. But I don't know enough authors. So, you know, we really had to get fossicking there. And obviously due to time and the reality of life and applying for grants and keeping your playground going, not all of the authors that I would have loved to have contributed to this book could, and that's fine. Quite honestly, that was another great reason to be connected to Common Threads and Shelley in this regard, because Shelley was also very helpful in connecting and helping me network with a few of the final authors for this book. So there was a strong goal to have a broad range of playgrounds represented culturally and geographically. And that's just to go back to that idea of really wanting this to be a resource that would strike a chord with anyone regardless of where they were, not to read a chapter and be like, love it so much, but it would never work, but to be able to piece together the parts across different stories to make it work for individuals in their settings. That was a really powerful goal that we wanted to realize in this book. Overall, really happy with the result. I put that last bullet point in there at the very last minute today, because one thing that has happened at the 11th hour, of course, is that the reality of this book actually happening now has sort of inspired a few other people to reach out and be like, oh, well, if you ever do another one, perhaps, we'd like to contribute. So who knows? I mean, how diverse could these stories be? And look, we'll get to it at the end of the session as well. But I think one thing I have learned, and probably not that unexpectedly, is that every adventure playground has its own story. There's no carbon copied story of an adventure playground. And I think that's very, very important, because you can get a playground out of a catalog and put it in a park around the country. But an adventure playground is something quite different to that. For those interested who might be wanting to read or at least understand who has contributed to the story, that is our final list of authors on the screen there. As you can see, there's a really nice variance. There are a couple of double ups, but what you'll find is that where there are double ups in geographical location, the style or the story that goes with it is quite different. It's quite different for its own reasons. So that 12 chapters will be present in the final book. We hope at the very, very least 11 it's looking like. But these are the contributors here. Not going to read them one by one. I'll let you have a quick look at that. But this has been an interesting experience to connect with these people. And I will say that, yeah, they're all different. They're so different, the stories and the why. And I'm really big on that question, why. For those that have seen me speak in Australia, why play is my fundamental, that's where I start talking if I'm working with a new service, because it's a question that when things become buzzwords, are not always asked. The why. It's like, because we need to, there's a box that we need to tick on the wall. That's why we're doing it. You know, that question why is really important. So for each of these playgrounds, their why is quite different, but profound as well. And I hope that really sings in the story itself. So pulling it together. Now, this is an interesting one for me, because even the way that I'm going to tell it now is a bit shambly, but that's, once again, it's my first experience, my first experience doing it. So pulling it all together, the first thing to do was get the authors, obviously, as best as possible. And that changed a little bit in the early stages. As I said, people were enthusiastic to commit, but then realized they couldn't, and so on and so forth. So date setting. And I share this information, honestly, mainly just if anyone else was inspired to try something like this. These are the things that I would now advise, learning from my own hiccups and hurdles, to do very, very early on. So date setting, make it clear. Yes, we want a book. It's like, having to do a uni assignment, but no one's giving you a deadline. What's your motivation? So really setting those dates early is important. Editing was a great experience for me. I've obviously edited a lot of my own work often, and always needs an on edit. But getting really deep into a lot of these articles, and it was challenging in some cases, because some of the authors were quite significantly more articulate than myself. There was also quite a few of our authors who are English second language, and pulling that all together was also very interesting. Learning. I think that's been one of my favorite things about this whole process, is that if every adventure playground story is different, then in every single chapter that I read, I learned something new. And that was really, really enjoyable as an author. I think when you think of yourself, or you'll put yourself in the position or the mindset of being an author, then you're the person that knows and is therefore writing about the thing that you know. Whereas this was not that at all. This was quite different than that. And every single chapter that was being edited was a new experience for me, a new story, a new journey, a new outcome. And that was very, very enjoyable. Prioritizing, that was a challenge, putting this together. This book is a look, I want to say it's a must-have, but this year it's a nice-to-have. There's been a lot of other stuff on, so finding that hour at the end of the day to sit down and do book stuff was interesting, but finding that hour was very, very important. So, it still needed to be done. It's been a journey, and now that we're on the homeward stretch, it feels really, really worthwhile. I think 6 months ago, I thought it was a nice thing. It was a cool book that was coming together, but without tooting my own horn, and I can't because I'm one chapter of 12, I've got to toot 11 other people's horns instead. Reading and editing the chapters over the last week, I think this book will be important. I do think it will help contemporary playgrounds maintain themselves if they already exist. And I really, really hope it will be a candle or a flare for the potential creation of new ones as well. None of all the above would have been possible without the expertise from Common Threads, though. So I'll shamelessly give the team, particularly Shelley and Karen, a shout out there, because it was a completely new experience for me. And who knows anything about publishing a book unless you've done it before, is all I'll say there. Don't want to go over time, but reflections. So reflections are really now coming together. And it was harder early on when there was half articles and some chapters not submitted, but now it's really, really pulling together in some really, really interesting ways. And each playground in the book really meets the need of its community. And that now, and I don't think, once again, I'm surprised about that, but once again, an adventure playground cannot be carbon copied. We cannot assume that something that is working well in one community should be the way that we do it in another one, especially somewhere else in the world. It needs to meet that community need first, I think, for it to be sustainable and to exist. And all of these playgrounds do that in their own ways. The one on the screen there in Sweden, for example, very, very built up area, lots of apartment living. And this playground has a very, very huge balance between its garden and its cooking and its growing as much as it does the loose parts and the typical adventure playground aesthetic, if that makes sense. And it's incredibly important to the community that they have that space. So the differences can still be underpinned, though, by this idea of compensatory practice, which is a playwork term for those who have not heard that before. But each playground meets a need, and it's a need that's not been met somewhere else. To basically simplify that idea, so compensatory, and an example of these that are, if you do read the book, you'll see this throughout the chapters. These ideas becoming obvious. So movable, adaptable spaces in a static world. That's so obvious. And once again, not to criticize typical playgrounds, swings, monkey bars, and slides, but you can play on those, but only to a point. And there's no way to compound that idea. But these movable, adaptable spaces, particularly for children that are going to go there again and again and again and again. And that's really obvious in the school settings, where you might have children using exactly the same play space for up to 7 years in primary school. That space needs to be something more than a static fixed structure for those amazing stories to develop. Freedom and choice versus authority, obviously. Gardens and woods in urban environments. Tiverton is an amazing example of that. Mess and chaos versus adult structure and order. And I did bracket adult there because obviously there's an immense amount of structure in play that children create and children develop. If you're not the dog and I'm not the cat, then there's no game, sort of thing. But the adult structure is removed in a lot of these spaces. And last but not least, and this came out of a lot of chapters, and I love this idea of the ability to be wrong with no concern versus the constant assessment and judgment that is in a lot of children's lives these days. So these loose parts adventure playgrounds that you make something, it's not perfect. It doesn't matter. Do it again. It's just not a thing. So you can actively be wrong, experiment, develop those ideas without judgment. And those observations in these chapters were quite common in how interesting that was to watch. I had a separate slide here for the pop-ups. Because I wanted diversity in this book, I was almost reluctant in the beginning to have two pop-up style of playgrounds. So we've got the Woodford Folk Festival, which a team that I actually know quite well did for 7 days at the Woodford Folk Festival in Southeast Queensland. And of course, Woodland Tribe the UK-based organisation. However, I'm really glad I did the both of them now, because the inception story, the inception chapters in Woodland Tribe are amazingly similar to how the Woodford Folk Festival chapter goes, because they were experimenting. This had never been done in Australia at a festival in this way. So they were teething all of these ideas very intuitively without the manual, so to speak. And then it was interesting going into Tom Williams's chapter on the Woodland Tribe, going back years and years and years now, and almost hearing the same teething stories. So that was really, really cool. Now, the reason I differentiate them as well is there's a big difference between pop-ups and set fixed adventure playgrounds, because it's more difficult to meet that community and culture, or at least have it grow and evolve, because it's not going to be there forever. However, in the chapters, you can really see the style of festivals that these pop-ups are developed at. There is a culture. Those festivals have a culture of their own, very much so. And that definitely does infuse itself into the playground and the willingness of the parents who are there to give over the children to that space and those experiences for those times. So they are quite a couple of different chapters, for lack of a better word, but interesting, very, very interesting in their own way, and a great way to showcase an idea to many thousands of people in a bit of a different way than if you didn't go to that community, you'd never know this thing exists, if that makes sense. More reflections. So there are tremendous similarities. However, there are also tremendous similarities. So there's, all the playgrounds are different, but there are tremendous similarities, however, that transcend the physical spaces and the compensatory needs of the children and community. And these are the people. This is the really interesting thing about the play workers who authored these chapters. They were from every walk of life, such different spaces, such different education and backgrounds and reasons why they were in the playground. But there was something the same as well in reading their passion and how that flowed through. Some underlying threads that were similar also include perceptions and scrutiny. And as a play worker, I think we all need to arm ourselves almost equally with the ability to debate and argue that perception and scrutiny that we can get from the outside world or the uninitiated, if that makes sense. Because without that skill, you know, the belief, the faith in play sometimes isn't enough. All of these playgrounds exist in spaces that aren't always, you know, completely, you know, up to their own devices. They could be shut down at any point or defunded or, you know, any number of things. Challenges and hardship. Not one chapter, I think, doesn't share a challenge or a problem, something to overcome. But every chapter has that shared insurmountable appreciation of the magic moments made by the children. And I love them because it doesn't feel forced. Every author that's written just is sharing their story, and it's impossible for their story not to carry that absolute appreciation for the play. I dare say that no play worker is in it for the millions. So the thing that's keeping them there is probably those stories. It was also mentioned several times in chapters with no coercion, that if adults could connect with their own childhood experiences, it always eased those initial perceptions, and that usually related to parents and other stakeholders who had some effect on the playground itself. That picture there, actually from Tiverton, that's a mother of a child that frequents the playground, climbing the tree that she climbed in that same playground when she was a child. So, you know, transcending those ideas, and if you can throw your mind back there, it's much easier to give over these experiences for our children. All right. Yeah, so for me, the biggest takeaway was the importance of the people. The people. You can have all the resources in the world, all the square meters in the world, but without the person or the people driving that project, absolutely selflessly for the children and their experiences, I just don't think it could work. I just don't think it could work, not in these contexts anyway. So it takes passion, perseverance, and really just caring a whole lot. Now, no play worker in any chapter gave themselves any credit for that. Any credit for that. No one made an overt statement about that, but it resonated. They didn't realize what they were saying, that every story carried over that, oh, without you, there would be no story to tell. And I think that's quite important. And, I think we should not necessarily need to boast about that, but we should take pride in that work, lest it, be lost or be underappreciated in the outside world. Now, that importance carries me back over to these quotes that are pulled straight from one of those books that I shared. Actually, I've got it there. So this is a book I bought from Common Threads quite a few years ago now, actually. And it was a progress report collection. So a collection of progress reports from older adventure playgrounds from the 40s, 50s, and so on. And now, what I loved about that, and this is one of those things now that really came back to me when I was thinking about these stories, was all of these quotes, and I'm not going to read them all, but I'm happy to leave it up there for a minute so you can. All of these quotes talk about what made the playground successful, because that's what the National Playing Fields Association was doing. They were gathering reports on what made these playgrounds successful, because if you're going to fund something as a government institution, you need to know why. Otherwise, you're going to get defunded really quickly. So they were going around and asking those questions. And what was really interesting reading this book was it became really evident that it did not matter how much square meters the playground was on. It did not matter how much resources they had or how they could access resources. It didn't matter if it was in the woods or if it was in the middle of a city. What mattered absolutely was the quality of the adult who ran that site, the play leader, as they were referred to as the time. Obviously, that term evolved into play worker. Every single one of those quotes makes that really evident, that it's the person that matters. And I do think that's important, because that absolutely transcended over to the stories that I was reading. And I was only just joking this afternoon with my wife that now that once I get all these chapters together, I think it will be very, very easy to go through and create a page exactly like that, but with quotes from the stories that we're reading now in these contemporary playgrounds. And despite so much change in the world and so much different things that children deal with, that adults deal with, economics, whatever you want, the thing that keeps these APs successful will still be in the caliber and quality and dedication and passion and however many words I can pull out there to describe them of that person. So in short, because I did want to leave some time for questions, and I think we do have about 10, I wanted to say a massive thank you to the chapter authors. I really mean that. And I actually did notice, I'm not sure if any of them are in the room tonight, but there were a couple registered for the conference. But a huge thank you, because once again, this has been a labor of love for all the authors involved. Just a chance to showcase and celebrate the amazing work that they do. And also a massive thanks to Shelley and Karen at Common Threads. This just wouldn't have happened without the expertise behind the scenes there. It would have been a pipe dream or something I wrote some notes about and nothing more. And thank you to everyone who has put up with me as the first cab off the rank at the conference. That's actually quite intimidating, Shelley. I hope it doesn't now get whitewashed with all the other amazing content that's coming up. And yeah, look, I hope, if nothing else, this book is picked up by someone and it just creates an idea and just starts that process, and we'll see what happens in that regard. Thank you very much.